A couple weeks back, the message, I think, from our voters pretty loud and clear was, we want you to get stuff done. If we in the Senate and in the House had passed the infrastructure bill and passed the Build Back Better bill before the Virginia elections, I think the outcome would have been different. And what we were hearing again and again from voters is, we gave you a majority and please act on it, especially at this time when Americans are so challenged by now nearly 20 months of pandemic and economic devastation. And so I stand on the floor as a proud Virginian, very focused on celebrating the accomplishment of yesterday, President Biden's signature of the infrastructure bill, but also saying we have to pass the Build Back Better bill in order to respond to what our constituents are asking of us at this challenging time. I want to speak today, Mr. President, sort of maybe not so much as a senator, but as a former city councilman and mayor. I'm sort of unique. There are 30 people in the history of the United States who have been a mayor, governor, and United States senator. Only 30 in our entire history. The first time I was introduced and someone said that, I thought that clearly cannot be right. So many governors become senators. It clearly cannot be right. I asked the Senate historian to research the matter because someone had introduced me that way, and it came back, that's correct. Only 30 people in the history of this country have been a mayor, a governor, and a senator. And as I pondered the reason for that, it suddenly occurred to me, being mayor will kill you. Governors can become senators, but mayors often make everyone mad. And it's hard to go from being a mayor to having a post-mayoral political career because the job is so tough. And yet, when people ask me which job you like better, governor or senator, I always say, look, I like them all, but if you made me give up every title I've ever had, the one I'd hold on to was mayor. I'd hold on to being mayor because when you're a mayor, it's 24/7, 365. Mr. President, there's no recess for a mayor. City councils and mayors don't go into recess. You're dealing with people on the issues that are the closest to them. You can make people happier or madder. You can convince people in local government in a nation of 330 million. Sometimes they think, oh, what does my vote matter? What does my voice matter? No one will listen to me. In local government, you can convince people that actually they will be listened to. So I'd hold on to that mayor role. And frankly, if I had not been mayor, I never would have been a lieutenant governor or a governor or a U.S. senator. So I owe anything that I am or do in politics now to the fact that I started in local government. I spoke yesterday to the Virginia Association of Counties, the gathering of all county supervisors of all 95 counties around Virginia. They gather once a year, usually in person. Last year it was by Zoom. They were so glad to be back together in person in Norfolk yesterday, hundreds of them in a conference room, and they asked me to come and talk about what's going on in Congress. I said, well, how much time do you have? But what I really focused on was three things, and I want to focus on those three things now, speaking about them from the perspective of local officials, not just in Virginia, but all over this country. First, the American Rescue Plan, which was passed in March, but it's just beginning to have an impact in Virginia cities, counties, and towns. Second, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was signed at the White House yesterday. And third, the education and workforce bill that we're working on now that I believe will reach the president's desk in December. I started off by telling these county supervisors what I truly believe about anybody in public life right now, elected or a first responder or a classroom teacher. When we're all finished with our times in public life, I think we'll look back on this period of time beginning March 2020 as the most important period of our public service careers. The pandemic has created such destruction, death, economic catastrophe, illness, division, that we've all been tested in our personal lives and in our work on behalf of our citizens. Our constituents have needed us in unparalleled ways since March of 2020. Last year on a cold Saturday in March, we passed the American Rescue Plan. It contains significant funding in four basic pillars: healthcare, relief to individuals and families, aid to businesses, And then finally, aid to state and local governments, including educational institutions. The American Rescue Plan immediately affected millions of Americans, families, healthcare, institutions, businesses, through measures like massive vaccine deployment, checks to individuals, business grants. These kept families afloat and helped protect themselves against COVID, and they also kept the lights on for many of our local businesses. But what I want to focus on, Mr. President, is the aid that we gave to state and local governments, and again, particularly to local governments. Virginia and its localities through the American Rescue Plan received $7.2 billion in the American Rescue Plan. $4 billion to the Commonwealth of Virginia, $3.2 billion to our cities, counties, and towns. And as soon as we passed it, I started to go around and talk to our cities, counties, towns. How are you going to spend these local monies? And what they told me was interesting. In April of last year, they said, well, first, we're going to wait and see how the state decides to spend their $4 billion, because we don't want to spend on something and have a state spend on the same thing. So we're going to let the state, the Governor Northam, the General Assembly program the $4 billion. But while the state is doing that, we're going to go out and dialogue with our citizens. And I really applaud my local governments. They had, recognizing this was one-time money that wouldn't happen every year, they had intense public dialogue with local constituents about what can we do to really transform, how can we use this money? And they have done it in fascinating ways. As I've traveled around the state and talked to these local governments, I see them advancing long-delayed capital projects, water and wastewater upgrades, closing the digital divide by investing in broadband, constructing community centers in parts of the community that haven't received investments in the past. Many gave hazard pay to first responders. The American Rescue Plan helped people fund police, ambulance, fire, mental health workers, public health workers. Grants to local nonprofits and churches that supported the community during COVID. Grants to shore up Virginia's hard-hit businesses that were engaged in the tourism industry as people stopped traveling. This is what our local governments have done with these dollars. The investments are supplemented by more than $3.5 billion additional dollars to Virginia child care providers, K-12 school systems, colleges, community colleges, with billions more for other local priorities like transit and broadband infrastructure. And so it was heartening to talk to these county officials. And Mr. President, there's more red counties in Virginia than there are blue counties. So I was talking to county officials from all over the state, and more would have been in Republican counties than Democratic counties. But they were thrilled that Congress, the Senate, by a one-vote margin, as we all remember, passed the American Rescue Plan to invest in these key local priorities. The bipartisan infrastructure bill. I told them I'm going to leave this floor and I'm going to race to Washington and hope that aren't any state troopers nearby, because I need to get to Washington to go to the signing at the White House of the infrastructure bill. This is the nation's biggest commitment to infrastructure since the Interstate Highway System initiative in the Eisenhower administration. It will employ hundreds of thousands of people and raise the platform for economic success for decades. Mr. President, you were in local government just like I was. And if you're in local government, you care about infrastructure. When I was a mayor, I had a transit system. I had roads. I had bike trails. I had an airport. I had an Amtrak station. I had a port on the James River, which is connected to the Chesapeake Bay and has a lot of ocean going and freight going out of our port. I had all of that. If you're in local government, you care about infrastructure. That's why it was exciting to see so many mayors and local officials at the White House yesterday when the bill was being signed. I was proud to cheer on my colleagues who worked on that bill, and I thank all of them. I'm especially proud that a provision that I had with Senator Wicker of Mississippi to enable our historically black colleges and universities and other minority-serving institutions to be involved in training the workforce and creating the innovations that we'll need to make this infrastructure investment was included in the bill. I want to give special thanks to my Virginia colleague, Mark Warner, who I think was sort of an unsung hero in the negotiations around the infrastructure bill. The impact of the bill is going to be felt in Virginia for generations. Billions for roads and bridges, ports and dredging, airports, rail to trails, railroad, climate resiliency, broadband, energy grid modernization, waste and wastewater infrastructure. The infrastructure bill contained a significant investment for Chesapeake Bay cleanup. That really matters to us. And a significant investment in the Appalachian Regional Commission. That really matters to Southern and Western Virginia, the parts of our state that are in Appalachia. Allocating these dollars to states so that they, in smart ways, will allow them to prioritize use of the funds in our cities, counties, and towns in a way that will ensure that each state gets to tackle the most important priorities, because the Virginia solution wouldn't be the California solution or the New Hampshire solution. Every state can use these funds to fund the projects that are of the most important there. Virginia is going to receive a minimum of $100 million for affordable broadband, at least $7.6 billion for roads and bridges, and at least $2.7 billion for transit, among other sizable investments. As I explained this to my Virginia Association of Counties yesterday morning, they were overjoyed, because they all have, and Mr. President, you remember this, they all have their local capital improvements project list with projects that had been bumping along for years, where there was never enough dollars to really advance it. Now the dollars will be there to get the projects done and cross them off the list. I want to now talk about the third bill. The administration calls this bill the Build Back Better bill, and some call it the reconciliation bill because of the Senate budget procedure that we're using to pass it. As a member of the Budget and Health, Education, Labor, Pension Committee, I call it the Education and Workforce Bill. It's an education and workforce bill. This bill, to me, is fundamentally about preparing America's workers for tomorrow and making sure that our workforce has the training and the child care and the housing and the health care to outcompete any country in the world. If we want to make good on the promise of the infrastructure bill, who's going to build it? We just signed an infrastructure bill, but it didn't have the training and the education component. Who's going to build this? We have to have a workforce to build this massive infrastructure improvement, once in a generation improvement. That's what the Build Back Better bill is about. We're not going to outcompete China just by diplomacy or tariffs or tough talk. We're not going to outcompete China just by growing our military budget. The best way to outcompete China is to invest in America's workers. The success of America's economy in the next 50 years will depend on us making the same investments that allowed us to thrive in the 20th century. Investing in infrastructure, investing in people. And that's the basis of Build Back Better. This education and workforce bill also provides sizable investments in community colleges to train workers for infrastructure jobs, to train the next generation of K-12 teachers, and to train workers to enable America to lead the world into a new and innovative energy economy. There will be investments in rural economic development, a Pell Grant increase, an extension of the child tax credit, and additional health care and housing funds to reduce costs to American families. The bill will close the Medicaid coverage gap, lower health care costs and the costs of prescription drugs, and fund better public health infrastructure. Mr. President, the thing about this bill that maybe excites me the most is this: we'll be able to provide funding for states to make pre-kindergarten universally available for every 3- and 4-year-old in this country. And we'll do it through a mixed delivery model that supports high-quality public and private providers. This will help an additional 140,000 3- and 4-year-olds in Virginia have pre-K, and will also fund child care for the kids younger than 3 years old to bring down costs of child care for working families. When you combine both the pre-K and the child care support in Virginia, it will mean that 500,000 more kids just in my state will have access to quality and affordable child care and early education. When kids get a strong start, it puts them on a brighter path for the rest of their lives, and it makes it much easier for their parents to go into the workforce, knowing that their child has high quality and affordable child care options. Mr. President, if we pass this bill, and I'm confident we will, It's going to be the most pro-family and most pro-child bill Congress has ever passed. I believe this bill will do for children what Social Security did for seniors. End a status that we've long lived in this country where we accept a child poverty rate that's dramatically higher than the adult poverty rate. What does that say? What does that say about a society? This workforce and education bill, Build Back Better, will end our acceptance of that unacceptable status quo and move us to a position where we can cut child poverty and give our kids a much stronger start for a successful life. The American Rescue Plan, as I mentioned a minute ago, passed the Senate by just one vote. Just one vote. If one vote had changed all of those benefits to my local governments and to families and to educational institutions and to hospitals and healthcare network and to businesses, all of those would have not occurred. None of the counties whose leadership I spoke to yesterday would have received the monies that I talked about for the transformative projects. I hope we'll pass this education and workforce bill by a wider margin than just one vote. But if it is just one vote, so be it. So be it. When there was an effort in this chamber in August of 2017 to take health insurance away from 30 million people, one of the most dramatic moments in my entire public service career, we saved 30 million people's health care by one vote. By one vote. And when we acted on the American Rescue Plan in the middle of the pandemic in March to try to help our country climb out of the worst public health crisis in a century, we got it by one vote. I'd like a wider margin, but if it's just one vote, we'll still be doing really important work. Americans deserve a Congress that will fund businesses and schools, that will train the workforce, that will build out transportation networks, that will support hospitals and health clinics, deploy vaccines, provide additional funding for law enforcement officers and first responders, create better broadband connections, provide tax relief to working families and lower child care costs. Build Back Better is the next step to lift us out of the pandemic and rebuild the American economy. Mr. President, I got to say I'm 63 years old. I'll be 64 in February, and this has been the hardest 20 months of my life. And I think most people in this country might say the same thing. If you just think about the sheer numbers of 750,000 people who passed and people who've been ill. My wife and I both had COVID. We know a lot of people who've died of COVID. But beyond folks who didn't have COVID, but who had a grandchild born that they couldn't go visit, or a friend who died and they couldn't go to a funeral, or lost a job, or had a business that they'd sweated to build that had to shut its doors. It's been such a tough time. But as I looked out at the hundreds of county officials that were gathering in person yesterday in Norfolk and talked to them about these bills, and I saw them there in person, I detected an uplift. I'm feeling a sense of uplift. I'm feeling a sense of uplift as we see wages increasing. I'm feeling a sense of uplift as we make a commitment for the first time in a generation to be builders and invest and grow our infrastructure. I'm feeling a sense of uplift as we approach investing in our workers and in our families the same way we're investing in infrastructure. I have a feeling over the next couple of months these important investments will braid together in a way that will make people feel a sense of uplift about the economy. And as vaccines continue to be distributed, now boosters distributed, and Mr. President, how wonderful it was to hear you talking about your children being able to be vaccinated, your school-age children. I think that's going to contribute to a sense of uplift, too. And I just want this body to be a generator of uplift. Sadly, a lot's come out of the Capitol in the last few years that hadn't exactly been uplift for people. I believe we are standing on the threshold of a chapter where this body, the United States Senate, will be a great generator of uplift for the American people. And I think passing Build Back Better is a step that will be really important in making that happen. Thank you very much. I yield the floor.